Picture a man on a hill speaking to a crowd of poor people. No army, no laws, no wealth, just words. And yet, almost everything we call moral civilization today, almost everything we believe about dignity, forgiveness, power, carries the mark of those words. 2,000 words, spoken 2,000 years ago on a hill in Galilee. Nobody knows exactly where it happened. The site you visit today on pilgrimages wasn't chosen until 300 years later, by Byzantine monks working from oral tradition, not evidence. The church built there is less than 100 years old. The real hill, the actual place where a man stood and spoke to a desperate crowd, was lost to time. But the words survived intact. If that intrigues you, hit subscribe right now. This channel talks about faith without flattening the history, with everything we know and everything we still don't. A like or a comment helps more than you'd think. It tells us you want more of this, and it helps this reach someone else who needs to hear it today. Okay, let's keep going. To understand what these words meant, we have to understand who was speaking and to whom. This man was Jewish. He grew up meditating on the sacred scriptures of Israel. Those scriptures told a story of a God who created an ordered world and put humans in charge of it on his behalf. When humans ruled with wisdom and justice, when there was peace and enough for everyone, that was God's kingdom, here on earth. But humans rebelled. They built their own kingdoms, by their own wisdom. So God chose one family, Israel, and gave them his wisdom. A sacred covenant, beginning with Moses on Mount Sinai. The goal was simple. Israel, transformed by that wisdom, would represent God's kingdom before all nations. But on the day this man walked up the hill, God's kingdom was nowhere to be seen. Israel was under Rome's boot. Some believed the answer was stricter obedience to the law. Some believed the answer was cooperating with Rome, and they became the powerful ones. Some fled to the hills to fight. Some withdrew to the desert, waiting for a sign. But if you walked the hill country of Galilee, like he did, you mostly found ordinary people. Poor, sick, people who had lost their land to Roman taxes, people without power, and without hope. And that's who he went to, not the powerful. That's why the very first line of his sermon is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. The kingdom doesn't begin among the rich." It doesn't begin among the powerful. It begins exactly where people feel crushed and defeated. Now let's pause on the opening lines of the sermon, the 8 statements known as the Beatitudes. The word translated as blessed didn't mean, in his language, what it means to us today. The Greeks used that word for the gods, beings who lacked nothing, complete, untouchable. And this man uses it for the poor, for those who mourn, for the persecuted. To ears in that time, that wasn't comforting. It was almost shocking. How can someone crushed by life be in the same category as the gods? But these weren't new words. Centuries earlier, a prophet named Isaiah had written about someone who would come to bring good news to the poor, to comfort those who mourn. And at one point, in his hometown, this man reads that exact passage out loud and says, "This is happening today." The Beatitudes are him saying it again in different words to an entire crowd. But here's something almost nobody mentions. There's another version of the sermon preserved by a different writer named Luke. Shorter, harsher, and there, next to each blessing, there's an opposite fate. Blessed are the poor, but also, woe to you who are rich. Blessed are the hungry, but also, woe to you who are full. Matthew chooses not to include that part. 2 versions, same sermon, different emphasis. And if you look closely at the structure of the 8 Beatitudes, you notice something built like a puzzle piece, fit together with striking precision. The first one ends with, "Theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The last one ends the exact same way. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Everything in between sits sealed inside those 2 lines, like a box. It's an old writing trick from Hebrew poetry. You put everything inside a box, so nothing important gets lost along the way and won't. So the listener knows everything they're about to hear is about the same subject. A kingdom that begins, strangely, with people who have nothing. What looks at first glance like a random collection of teachings is actually architecture. 3 main sections. The middle section has 3 parts, and each of those in turn has 3 parts. Right at the center of the center sits a 50-word prayer. Our Father in heaven. It isn't placed there by accident. It's the literal heart of the sermon. Beat. Everything before it leads toward it. Everything after it flows from it. In a culture with no printed books, no internet, no notes, a structure like this wasn't decoration. It was a memory map. Something built to be carried in the mind for generations without losing a single word. If we've already spent a minute of this journey together, hit subscribe right now. It helps us enormously, and it means you won't miss what's coming next because things are only starting to connect. Now think about a phrase you've heard 100 times. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. It sounds like surrender, like weakness. But in that world, a backhand slap on the right cheek was the exact gesture a Roman master used to humiliate someone beneath him, a gesture between unequals. By turning the other cheek, you forced the other person to hit you with an open palm. The gesture used only between equals. It wasn't weakness, it was a form of dignity nobody expected from a man with no power at all. A way of exposing the injustice, not surrendering to it. Or take the phrase, go with him 2 miles. A Roman soldier could legally force any local to carry his gear for exactly 1 mile. Not a step more, it was occupation law, not a request. And he says, carry it too. Turn a forced obligation into a choice nobody can take from you. This isn't a sermon about being weak, it's a sermon about how you take power back when you have none at all. Or take the phrase, you are the salt of the earth. In Galilee at that time, salt gathered near the Dead Sea was often mixed with minerals, and over time it would lose its saltiness, becoming useless dust fit only to be thrown out on the road. Everyone in that crowd knew exactly what salt that had lost its flavor looked like. They saw it thrown out every day. So this wasn't an abstract metaphor, it was a very concrete warning, drawn from an image they saw with their own eyes. And right after, salt comes a second image. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill, he says, cannot be hidden. In Galilee at that time, small towns were built exactly that way, on high ground, visible for miles, used as landmarks for travelers at night. This wasn't a vague metaphor about being good. It was an image they literally saw on the horizon every single evening. These words didn't stay stuck on that hill in Galilee. They traveled through time like a virus of hope, landing on the desks of people who would go on to change the world again. Centuries later, a Russian writer named Tolstoy read them and wrote an entire book about their power, about the idea of not answering evil with evil. That book ended up in the hands of a young lawyer in India. His name was Gandhi. And Gandhi built an entire movement of nonviolent resistance on those ideas, one that freed a nation. Decades later, a pastor from a small town in Georgia, America, studied Gandhi's methods closely. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. 3 men, 3 continents, almost 2,000 years apart, all connected to the same 2,000 words, spoken on a hill in Galilee, by a man with no worldly power at all. Maybe it wasn't chance that kept these words alive for this long. Maybe things spoken from the most powerless place of all become, strangely, the most powerful words humanity has ever heard. If this changed the way you see this sermon, even a little, tell me in the comments which part surprised you most. And if you want this series to continue, subscribe, because next up are the Beatitudes, in full, explained the way almost nobody has explained them before.